Hello fellow Planeswalkers, it's Scott and we're back for day 6 of Murder at Karlov Manor spoilers. We got only a few cards today, but most of them are rares and mythics, so I think we've got some good cards to talk about. So let's dive into Murders at Karlov Manor. So our first card is Ezrim Agency Chief. For 1, 2 white and 2 blue mana, you get a legendary creature that's an Archon Detective with flying and is 5/5. When Ezrim Agency Chief enters the battlefield, investigate twice. And for 1, sacrifice an artifact. Ezrim gains your choice of Vigilance, Lifelink, or Hexproof until end of turn. So for 5 mana, it's a lot of mana for a card, but it does give you the advantage of getting those 2 investigate tokens when it comes into play, and then you can later then sacrifice those to either have Vigilance or Lifelink or even get Hexproof. So I think there's a lot here in this card, and it looks like we're getting pretty close for the first time in several years of having an Azorius Flyers deck that I think really could do something in Standard. So we'll have to see how things go with the rest of the set, but I think there's a place in an Azorius Flyers deck for this. I think even in the Esper Control deck or Esper Midrange deck, I think this might even have a place there because of its abilities. Alright, moving on. We've got Urgent Necropsy. Next we've got Urgent Necropsy. For 2, a black and a green mana, you get an instant. As an additional cost to cast this spell, collect evidence X, where X is the total mana value of the permanent this spell targets. Destroy up to 1 target artifact, up to 1 target creature, and up to 1 target enchantment, and up to 1 target planeswalker. Wow. So this is a powerful spell because it can kill an artifact, a creature, an enchantment, and a planeswalker. The only downside of it is you have to have in your graveyard the mana value of those items that you want to go ahead and target and destroy. So I think in a dedicated mill deck, I think this is a fantastic card because you're going to have in your graveyard the resources you need to destroy that artifact, that creature, that planeswalker, and that enchantment. But I'm not sure if this fits into other decks, but we have seen 4 mana remover spells like this have a place in Standard, so I'm not 100% sold on it, but I think this potentially has the ability to see play in Standard. Next we have Lost in the Maze. For X and 2 blue mana, you get an enchantment, and it has flash. When Lost in the Maze enters the battlefield, tap X target creatures, put a stun counter on each of those creatures you don't control. Tap creatures you control have hexproof. So this is a very interesting card because it's potentially a protection spell on one side, and it's also a way of putting stun counters on creatures you don't control. So you could do this after a person's upkeep and then go ahead and stun all of them so they can't do anything on that particular turn, and then they would remove the stun counter on the next turn. So in essence you would get 2 turns off from your opponent being able to use those creatures to block or to attack with. A nice thing here is you can tap one of your own creatures to give it hexproof and protect it if you needed to as well. So I'm wondering if this is where Hinata might come back into Standard and be a card that we see play again, because Hinata's ability allows you to pay 1 less for a spell for each target of that spell. And this is the kind of the perfect spell for that, because it just really in the end costs you only 2 mana to activate this ability. So we'll see if this might be something that we could revitalize Hinata with in Standard. But otherwise I think this is a good card that, because it has flash and can be used on your opponent's turn, I think this has Standard playability in a blue deck. Next we've got Cryptex. For 2 mana, you get an artifact, and it has tap, collect evidence 3, add 1 mana of any color, put an unlock counter on Cryptex, and then you can sacrifice Cryptex and surveil 3, then draw 3 cards. Activate only if Cryptex has 5 or more unlock counters on it. So I think the ability to get mana by using your graveyard is a nice ability. This is 2 mana, not 3 mana, which is the typical cost of a artifact that produces mana, so that we get a slightly lower cost. But I'm not sure if in the long run this is better than any of the 3 mana ones, because this is a conditional ability to add mana, and you might not have the ability to collect evidence on every turn. And I think getting to that 5 unlock counters is going to be difficult in standard. So limited playable, but probably not in standard. Next, we've got dual cards here with Cease and Desist. For 1 and a black or a green mana, you get Cease, which is an instant, and you can exile up to 2 target cards from a single graveyard. Target player gains 2 life and draws a card. So nice ability on the front side of it, or on the front half of it, where you can exile some cards from a graveyard, you can gain 2 life and then draw a card. So nice abilities there. On the Desist side, it costs 6 mana, and you can destroy all artifacts and enchantments. So I can see this being even in a deck that really wants to have a way to deal with artifacts and enchantments late in the game or in the mid game. So of all the ones we've seen so far, I think this is the one most likely to see play, because you can use the exile ability, draw a card, gain a couple of life, and if you draw it later in the game and your opponent's playing a lot of enchantments or a lot of artifacts, you can then use it to go ahead and destroy those things. Next, we've got Fuss and Bother. For 2 and a hybrid red or white mana, you get Fuss, and it's an instant, and you can put a +1/+1 counter on each attacking creature you control. So nice combat trick in the mid to late game, where you're buffing all of your creatures up, probably after your opponent has declared blockers, and this gives you the ability to trade better in those situations, or not even trade at all. Then on the other half, you've got Bother for 6 mana in hybrid Azorius mana. You can create 3 colorless Thopter artifact creature tokens with flying and Surveil too. So I'm not really excited about this side of the card at all, but we have seen abilities like Fuss before that have seen play in standard. So I think there's a chance that we see this in a Boros deck as something to help a go wide strategy in the mid to late game. Next, we've got Glint Weaver. For 5 and 2 green mana, you get a spider with reach. That's a 3/3. And when Glint Weaver enters the battlefield, distribute 3 +1/+1 counters among 1, 2, or 3 target creatures. Then you gain life equal to the greatest toughness among creatures you control. Limited card only because of the 7 mana cost. We need more out of something in green that's going to be 7 mana, and quite frankly, we already have stuff that's better in standard for 7 mana. Next, we've got Karlov Watchdog. For 3 and a white mana, you get a dog. That's a 3/2 with vigilance, and permits your opponent control cannot be turned face up during your turn. And whenever you attack with 3 or more creatures you control get +1/+1 until end of turn. So a very interesting card. 4 mana seems like a lot, but because of the ability to prevent your opponent from turning any permanents face up, I think that's a nice ability to have on it. So I think this has potentially sideboard capabilities, and even in decks that are using a go wide strategy, that ability to give creatures +1/+1 until the end of turn when you're attacking with 3 or more is a desirable ability. So this has got a lot of abilities on it, and I think those abilities really are something that make it possible to see a little bit of play even in standard. In limited, I think it's a very good card, and it should be one you want to look at if you're playing white to put in your deck. And our last card of the day is Sanctuary Wall. For 1 and a white mana, you get an artifact creature. That's a wall. It's a 0/4 with Defender. And for 2 and a white, you can tap target creature. You may put a stun counter on it. If you do, put a stun counter on Sanctuary Wall. So nice stun spell, potentially. against a creature that your opponent is playing that you have to lock down. So in limited, I think this is a playable card, but again, unless we've got a dedicated Toughness Matters deck, or we get a card that removes Defender, I don't think this has got much, if any, standard playability. All right, those are the cards from Sunday, and we'll be back with more on Monday from Murders at Karlov Manor spoilers. Thanks for watching till the end of the video. You can see our preview videos from Friday and Saturday by clicking on the links on the screen. All right, I'll see you next time.